All right, I got another interesting story with an unusual situation. We had a big Arizona cypress fall down and it hit the house. And the tree was laying like this for about 6 weeks. He was going to wait for us. So we got there and the brush was actually kind of dry. Now, to do the job, there wasn't anything above me to tie into. So I really had to be very careful. I was walking on all of these horizontal branches, making these cuts, but I had to do it very carefully so as not to cut the wrong branch, because some of the branches were supporting the weight of the whole tree. So the branches that were on the top and didn't have any pressure on them, those I could take out easy. So it was kind of a puzzle. When you have a situation like this with a lot of things that you can break, like this window, or copper rain gutters, or the tile roof for all that, you have to be very, very careful. And the surface down underneath was, they were tiles. It was an interesting job. The location was very interesting. The house was amazing. This was from an old train trestle, and he used this to build his back patio. It was kind of interesting. Those mortises and tenons are really just faux mortise and tenons. They don't do anything. I can't imagine that was like that when he assembled it, but somebody was creative, but they didn't really understand how timber frame works. So this was a beautiful location. Here's where we had to drag all the brush. It was a long haul, a long haul through the hall. But the place was like a castle. It was really, really a beautiful environment. And the client was really nice too. So here's where we have these loaded limbs. They were pressurized from laying down here. We've got this brush cart that I built years ago. We've actually got 2 of them. They're really heavy duty. And if you put a couple of 2x4s in the slots, you can haul out a heck of a lot of brush. They're also quite useful for hauling wood out as well. So I took my time. Look at that outdoor shower. I took my time and pieced it out one step at a time, dragged the stuff off the roof. There's Jorge using that brush cart. He hauled all of the brush and all of the wood out as I was cutting. It was a hard job, but he had to think because this was supported in so many spots that I had to be sure not to cut something that would cause the whole thing to roll over or fall down and cause more damage to the wall or to the building. So I got down to the last few cuts. As you can see here, these are the last little bits that were supported by the wall. And this really long one was setting on top of the wall as well. So I knew I had to cut it off there, but here's where that prop comes in. I reached a point where I figured I needed a little bit more support on the log. This was pressured right here quite hard as well. I kept making little cuts, but this long one right here, I was looking at it thinking there's got to be a lot of pressure on that one piece. So what I did is I took a section of the trunk and I set it up underneath. There it is. I took that section of the trunk and I leaned it up and I made a visual mark and I pressured it in there and beat it in hard. There's the stump of this thing. It uprooted, but it wasn't rotten. The wood seemed quite sound in there. Arizona cypress is a beautiful wood, and I've milled it a few times in my life, and it's got some really good characteristics. And there's the prop. I put it in there. I beat it in with a sledgehammer, getting it really to seat properly is important. And that took some of the pressure off of it, but I still got to make that cut. And with all the strain on that, I'll be honest with you, I was a little bit nervous because you could get into real trouble if you cut a loaded branch and it snaps on you real fast. Maybe I'm being a little bit too cautious, but I've experienced situations like this so many times in my life where I either got whipped by a branch or it popped back at me and almost hit me hard. So I'm taking my time here. As it turned out, it wasn't under that much of a load. But, better safe than sorry. There's the prop. And I was able to cut off all those big heavy pieces and got it down just to the edge there. And I was looking at it thinking, okay, if I push it off, it might rotate and still hit the wall. So I cut another small piece off. And as you can see, it's only halfway on the prop now. And a little kick and it went right off. I did take the time and slab out a piece by hand and we hit a nail. Of course I hit a nail. Cut that nail portion out of there and I took it over to my friend Toby's house. We've got a bandsaw mill and I milled up 3 2-inch pieces and 1 1-inch piece. Beautiful, beautiful wood. So we've got yet another job. These are all from this week. I had these 3 liquidambars to cut down, and the reasoning for cutting these trees down, first off, they were too close to the building, the roots were damaging, I think it's septic line or something, and they'd been topped repeatedly, so they had about 30 feet of top growth off of the old topped cuts of new growth, and in order to save them, we would have had to top them again. And he said, let's just get rid of them. And I agree. Sometimes if you've got a tree that's had mistakes, it's better to start over. So I used the bucket and I got the first tree down. And there we are, the Mandozer. I'm going to patent this thing. I tell you, this is such a good idea. Heritage tree removal. Where we live, the cities require removal permits if you want to take down a big tree. Anything over about 12 inches, you've got to pay for a permit. Welcome to California. There's a nice picture of me up in the bucket. We're going to ultimately grind out these stumps and he's going to re-landscape this whole area. This is tree number 2 after I got it all brushed out. Pulled it over. Tree number 3. Cutting my wedge. This one I didn't put a rope on. I didn't need to. It wasn't big enough. All this time I'm cutting, I'm thinking, these are some pretty nice straight trunks. Liquidambar is not one of my favored woods for cutting on the sawmill, but it's a nice wood, and it used to be used quite a bit in colonial times because there were a lot of native liquidambars. They call them sweet gums on the East Coast. It's an East Coast tree, but it's imported into California and other states, and they actually grow faster in California than they do in their native habitat because, we just, where these are growing, we just don't get the cold snaps like they do in the East Coast. So oftentimes they grow bigger and faster and very, very different than what they would in their native habitat. So I'm cutting along and all of a sudden I realize my saw is slowing down and the shavings are not quite right. They're just like fine dust. Did I hit something? Not another nail. Oh, yep. This nail was pounded in the tree down low where you wouldn't normally find a nail. And it was in there a long time ago. And it was a pretty sizable nail too. It was like a 40 penny nail there. And I made a little mistake. When I cut my wedge, I overcut it on the bottom. And because I hit the nail, I didn't take the time to fix my cut. And so Jorge went over and got the saw that he brought with him and said, "All right, I'll finish it." You know, you got to have fun on the job. So we cut up all the firewood, and I decided just to mill up one of the logs. This job took me 2 days. I got it totally brushed out and everything on the ground on day number 1. So here's the chain on my 500i that I hit the nail, and as you can see, the teeth are munched pretty good. I thought, well, I can sharpen it up, but I looked at it really close, and you know, some of these teeth are just really, really in bad shape. Let me show you what they look like here. So first off, I thought, well, let me start sharpening. I sharpened one direction, and I was realizing that I was doing an awful lot of sharpening. And then I looked at the other side and realized, you know, this chain, I'm going to have to do so much work on this chain. Is it worth it to sharpen it? Sometimes it is, but if you munch a chain really good on a rock or hit the dirt or you know, the worst thing you can do is hit a piece of metal. Sometimes it's just not worth it. So I spent probably 5 or 10 minutes starting to sharpen this, and I think the reality of just how long it would take to sharpen it all the way up, because I'd have to bring all the rakers down. Golf ball for a handle. Try it. You'll love it. Fits in the palm of your hand. There's a really dull tooth. That's one that I just got through sharpening, so it's better. And that was on the other side. There was a sharp one. Okay, let's talk about bar maintenance a little bit. Do you see that little burr on the bar right there? When you run a chain, it pushes down on the metal, and ultimately it causes a little bit of a burr. And because the chain is just slightly thicker than the thickness of the bar, if you create a burr on the bar, that burr drags in the kerf of the cut. Does that make sense? So if you could feel it with your thumbnail, get a flat file out and take that burr down. Here I'm showing it with my knife. It's not really big, but that is enough. You can see how the knife is catching that little bit of an edge. It's also important to make sure that the oiler ports don't get clogged up. And I always take whenever I switch the chain out, I always take my knife and I run it up the gullet. That's not the right word. I don't know what you call the slot in the chainsaw bar. I know there's a word for it. But if you run the knife all the way up and down, what it does is it takes out the buildup of sawdust and just gunk in there and allows the oil to run freer, because you want the chain to set all the way down in there. So I went and put my chainsaw on the mill, swapped out the chain to a milling chain, which is a different type of chain. And I got 4 2-inch slabs out of it. Thought about milling up the other one, but we were reaching kind of a time constraint there, and I just said, nah, that's enough. In the springtime, as the wood is going from being dormant to starting to grow again, the bark on a tree peels quite easily. So these slabs, they could easily be natural edge slabs, but I was able to pop the bark off, very, very simple. You just start with a hammer just to, break it loose on one end. And then if you put your wedge underneath, or even your fingers, if you're careful, watch out for those little sharp bits. But it comes off quite easy. And the client was there and he says, would you like to see my table? Oh my goodness, black walnut. That's a $20,000 table. And that's the job.